The city of Ayoru never slept. Streets bustled with laughter, music, and the rich aroma of roasted maize. But behind the golden gates of a grand mansion, a girl lived in silence. Adwoa, born into wealth, but never into love. Her mother died bringing her into this world, and from that moment, her stepmother Kemi saw her as a curse. To the world, Kemi was a picture of grace, a kind, loving woman who raised Adwoa as her own. But behind closed doors, she was a storm. She never raised a hand, never left a mark. Instead, she broke Adwoa in ways no one could see. Cold meals, locked doors, whispered insults that cut deeper than any blade. Adwoa learned to survive, but survival wouldn't be enough tonight. Passing by Kemi's room, she heard a voice, calm, steady, and terrifying. She has lived long enough. It's time to get rid of her, permanently. The air vanished from Adwoa's lungs. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared they would hear it. Kemi wasn't just cruel, she wanted her dead. The walls were closing in. Adwoa's heartbeat pounded in her ears as she backed away from Kemi's door, her breath shallow and unsteady. The words she had just heard twisted around her throat like a noose. It's time to get rid of her, permanently. The weight of it pressed against her chest. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't just cruelty. This was death, and it was coming for her. She had to run, tonight. Her hands trembled as she tiptoed down the dark hallway, past the flickering candlelight, past the sleeping guards. Every shadow felt like a hand reaching out to grab her. Every creak in the floor made her flinch. She had no money, no allies, nowhere to go, but none of that mattered. She just needed to get out. But just as she reached the back door, a hand clamped over her mouth. Darkness swallowed her. A bitter taste coated her tongue, and the world around her blurred. Her body turned heavy, her legs collapsed beneath her, and the last thing she heard before slipping into unconsciousness was Kemi's voice, soft and satisfied. She's ready. A sharp jolt yanked Adwoa back to life. Her head throbbed. Her body felt weak, like she had been asleep for days. When she opened her eyes, all she saw was blackness. The air was thick and damp, filled with the scent of something wild. Then the world lurched again. A carriage. She was inside a carriage, its wooden wheels thudding against the dirt road. Panic shot through her veins as she struggled to sit up. Her wrists were bound, her ankles tied, and across from her sat two men in black uniforms, their faces blank, their eyes cold. "Where?" Her voice cracked. "Where are you taking me?" Neither man answered. The carriage rocked violently, and through the tiny gap in the door she saw trees. Not the familiar streets of Ayoru, not the towering mansions. This was somewhere else. Somewhere far, somewhere no one would find her. Then she heard it, a distant roar, deep, low, and full of hunger. Her stomach twisted. The Zambari Wild Reserve. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just a place of wild beauty. It was a place of death, a land where tigers, lions, and beasts roamed freely, where trespassers never made it out alive. And Kemi had sent her here, not to be poisoned, not to be stabbed, but to be eaten. Terror gripped her as the realization sank in. There would be no body to bury, no questions asked, just another unlucky soul lost to the wild. She yanked at the ropes, her skin burning against the rough fibers, but the knots were too tight. The men barely glanced at her struggle. They had seen this before. They had done this before. One of them reached for a dagger strapped to his waist. For a moment, she thought he might use it on her, but instead, he leaned forward and cut the ropes around her ankles. She blinked in confusion. The other man let out a dry chuckle. "No need for all that. You won't be needing ropes where you're going." Adwoa's breath hitched. Her blood froze when the carriage finally came to a stop. The doors creaked open. The night air was heavy and humid, carrying the distant howls of unseen creatures. Adwoa was dragged out onto the damp earth, her legs too weak to hold her up. She collapsed onto her knees, her fingers digging into the dirt. A tall man, dressed in a dark cloak, stood waiting. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were empty, the eyes of someone who had long stopped caring about the lives he destroyed. "She's the one?" he asked, his voice deep and flat. The guards nodded. "Kemi paid double. She doesn't come back." The man studied Adwoa for a long moment. Then he sighed and motioned toward a massive rusted metal cage standing a few feet away. Adwoa followed his gaze, and her heart nearly stopped. Inside the cage lay a tiger, not just any tiger. This one was massive, its muscles shifting beneath its striped fur, its golden eyes glowing like fire in the dark. It lay still, but there was something in its stare, a quiet, deadly patience, waiting, watching. She struggled harder. "Please, I'll do anything. Just don't." Her plea was met with silence. The men grabbed her by the arms, hauling her toward the cage. "No, please!" She kicked, thrashed, screamed, but they didn't stop. Her feet scraped against the dirt as they forced her forward. The cage door creaked open. The tiger lifted its head, and then she was thrown inside. The door slammed shut behind her. The last thing she saw before the men walked away was Kemi's bracelet hanging from the tall man's belt. A payment, a reminder. Adwoa was nothing more than a deal made in the dark, and now she was face to face with death itself. The ground beneath Adwoa felt like it was shaking. Her knees scraped against the rough dirt as the guards dragged her forward, her wrists burning from the tight ropes. She wanted to fight, to scream, but her voice had left her. Only fear remained. The rusty metal cage stood before her, its bars bent and worn with age. Inside, in the dim moonlight, lay a massive Bengal tiger. Its fur gleamed, golden and black, muscles shifting beneath its skin. It wasn't asleep. It was waiting, watching. Adwoa's breath hitched. One of the guards chuckled, pushing her forward. "Well, girl, looks like this is where we say goodbye." The other guard smirked, shaking his head. "Shame. Such a pretty little thing." Their words barely registered. The tiger's eyes were locked on her. Its gaze was piercing, unreadable, a quiet, patient predator. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't do this." But mercy wasn't meant for her. The guards shoved her inside, the metal door slamming shut behind her. A wave of dust rose as she fell onto her hands and knees. The sound of the lock clicking into place sent ice through her veins. She was trapped, alone, with a beast. "Survive if you can," one of the guards mocked before walking away. Their laughter faded into the distance, swallowed by the thick jungle night. Silence. Only the sound of her ragged breathing. She turned her head slowly, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. The tiger had risen to its feet. Its massive frame towered over her, muscles rippling beneath its striped fur. It took one slow step forward, then another, its paws making almost no sound. Adwoa froze. This was it. This was how she would die. Torn apart, forgotten. Another nameless soul swallowed by the wild. Tears burned her eyes as she clenched her fists, bracing herself for the pain. But then, something unbelievable happened. The tiger stopped, its head tilted slightly, its golden eyes softening. It didn't snarl. It didn't pounce. It simply watched her. Adwoa's breath caught in her throat. The beast took a slow step closer, lowering its head, sniffing the air around her. Not like prey, not like an enemy, but something else, something gentler. She dared not move. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body refused. The tiger let out a soft huff. Then, it did something that made her heart nearly stop. It laid down, right in front of her. Adwoa's eyes widened. Was this real? Was she dreaming? She didn't understand. It should have attacked. It should have ripped her apart. But instead, it simply watched her with calm, golden eyes. A sharp sob escaped her lips, her body trembling. She wasn't going to die. Not yet. But why? The answer came in a memory, distant but clear. Her mother's voice, soft where warm, whispering secrets of the old ways. "The animals of the wild, my love, they understand more than we do. They see things we cannot. They feel what is in our hearts." Had the tiger sensed something in her, her fear, her pain, or had it seen something familiar? The realization made her chest tighten. She wasn't the predator. She wasn't even the prey. She was just another creature abandoned in the wild. A quiet bond formed in the air between them, fragile but unbreakable. Adwoa slowly moved, cautiously reaching out a trembling hand. The tiger didn't flinch. It didn't move. And then, it let her touch it. Her fingers brushed against the soft fur, warm and smooth beneath her fingertips. A shiver ran through her, but not from fear, from something else, something like hope. For the first time in years, she felt safe. The jungle whispered around them, the wind carrying distant howls of other beasts. But inside this cage, within the cold iron bars meant to be her grave, she had found an ally. A desperate breath left her lips. She wasn't dead, not yet. But Kemi's plan wasn't over, and if she wanted to survive, she needed to think fast. Adwoa sat frozen, her body pressed against the cold metal bars. The tiger stood before her, its golden eyes locked onto hers. She could hear its deep, rumbling breath, feel the warmth radiating from its massive body. This was the moment she was supposed to die. But the tiger didn't pounce. Instead, it stepped forward, sniffing the air around her. Its whiskers twitched, its breath brushing against her skin. Her entire body tensed. She clenched her fists, ready for the pain, for the sharp teeth to sink into her flesh. But then, the tiger let out a low, quiet sound. Not a growl, not a snarl, something softer. Then, to her absolute shock, it lay down beside her. Adwoa's breath caught in her throat. The guards outside the cage froze. Their laughter died. Their smirks vanished. One of them cursed under his breath. "What the hell is it doing?" This wasn't the plan," the other stammered. Kemi had paid them to get rid of her, to let the beast finish the job. But the beast had made a different choice. Adwoa barely dared to breathe. The tiger was close enough now that she could feel its slow, steady heartbeat through the ground. It wasn't growling. It wasn't baring its teeth. It was calm. For the first time in days, she felt safe. Tears burned her eyes. No one had ever protected her. No one had ever cared. But this beast, this supposed killer, had chosen her. One of the guards snapped out of it. He grabbed the iron bars, shaking them. "Get up, you stupid animal! Do what you were paid to do!" The tiger's ears twitched. Its golden eyes darkened. A low, menacing growl rumbled through its chest. Adwoa saw it before the guards did. The shift, the beast that had been calm a second ago, was now dangerous. One of the guards reached for his spear. "I'll handle it." He stepped forward. The tiger lunged. A deafening roar split the night, shaking the very ground beneath them. The guards stumbled back. One of them screamed as the beast slammed into the bars, its massive claws scraping against the metal. Adwoa flinched, covering her ears. The roar wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. The tiger had chosen its side, and it wasn't with them. One of the guards panicked. He grabbed the key from his belt, fumbling with the lock. "We need to kill it. Now!" But before he could open the cage, the tiger turned. It looked at Adwoa. Its golden eyes filled with something she never thought she'd see in a beast. Understanding. Her hands were still bound, her body weak, but she knew what she had to do. Slowly, carefully, she shifted toward the tiger. It didn't move away. It didn't flinch. Instead, it did something that made her heart stop. It lowered its massive head and nudged her gently, as if telling her, "Now is your chance." Her mind screamed that this was insane. Tigers don't protect people. They don't make choices like this. But this one had. With shaking hands, Adwoa twisted her wrists, rubbing the ropes against the jagged floor of the cage. The fibers burned her skin, but she didn't stop. Outside, the guards were arguing. "We have to open it. Are you mad? It'll rip us apart." The ropes around her wrists snapped. Adwoa was free, and the tiger was waiting. The beast turned, its muscles coiling. It was ready to fight, ready to protect her. Adwoa met its gaze, swallowing hard. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. Adwoa's fingers trembled as she reached out. Her heart pounded in her chest, every instinct telling her to stay still, to be careful. But the tiger didn't move away. It just stared at her, its golden eyes deep, knowing. A memory surfaced, a story from her mother. "When our ancestors walked this land," her mother had whispered one night, "they were not alone. They were connected to the beasts of the wild, the tigers, the lions, the elephants. They were not just animals, they were guardians." Adwoa had laughed back then. She thought it was just a bedtime tale, a silly story. But now, faced with this beast that had spared her life, she wasn't so sure. The tiger recognized her, not as prey, not as an enemy, but as something else. Tears burned in her eyes. For years, she had felt unwanted, unloved, alone. But standing before this creature, she felt something stir inside her, a connection, a belonging. But the guards were not going to let her walk away. The second gate creaked open. Adwoa's breath hitched. Another tiger emerged, this one different. Its ribs jutted out, its fur was matted, its eyes hollow with hunger. This beast was starving. This one would not show mercy. The guards smirked. "Let's see if your little pet can save you now," one of them sneered. Adwoa's tiger let out a low, menacing growl, a warning. But the second tiger wasn't listening. It stalked forward, its body tense, ready to attack. Adwoa stumbled back. She had no way out. The first tiger, her tiger, moved in front of her, its body shielding her, protecting her. The second tiger lunged, a flash of orange, a roar that shook the ground. The two beasts collided, claws tearing, teeth snapping, a fight for survival. Adwoa pressed against the cage, her fingers digging into the cold metal. She couldn't watch. She had spent her whole life being powerless, being weak, but not anymore. She turned, her eyes locking onto the guards, the real monsters. They were too busy watching the fight, too entertained by the bloodshed. Adwoa's hands curled into fists. They thought she was just a helpless girl. They were wrong. She spotted the keys hanging from one guard's belt, her way out. Her tiger roared again, knocking the starving beast to the ground, pinning it down. It was winning, and so was she. With a deep breath, Adwoa ran. The ground trembled beneath Adwoa as the two tigers clashed, a whirlwind of claws, teeth, and fury. The second tiger, driven by starvation, fought with wild desperation. But the first tiger, her tiger, was stronger, faster, more determined. The guards had expected a quick, bloody end, but now they were the ones afraid. One of them stumbled back. This wasn't supposed to happen. Another reached for his spear, but his hands shook. Kill them both! Adwoa's heart pounded. She couldn't wait any longer. Her hands frantically searched the cage, feeling for anything, any weakness, any way out. Her fingers scraped against cold iron, her breath ragged with panic. Then she found it. A loose bar. She gripped it, pulling with all her strength. The metal groaned. Her muscles burned. It wouldn't move. Then a deafening roar filled the night. Adwoa looked up just in time to see the first tiger slam the second tiger to the ground, its massive paws pinning it down. The fight was almost over. The guards cursed, backing away from the cage. They knew they had lost control. Adwoa gritted her teeth and pulled again. This time, the bar snapped free. She didn't hesitate. With scraped hands and shaking legs, she squeezed through the opening, her body barely slipping past the jagged edges. She was free. The guards spotted her. She's escaping! But before they could reach her, the first tiger let out a victorious roar. Adwoa turned back and saw it standing over the lifeless body of the second tiger. It had won. For a brief moment, their eyes met. She should have been terrified, but she wasn't. The beast that had been sent to kill her had instead become her protector. The guards hesitated. None of them dared to move, not with the tiger still there. Then, the tiger did something she never expected. It looked at her one last time and turned away. Without a sound, the great beast disappeared into the wild, its striped body fading into the shadows, as if its job was done. Adwoa's chest tightened. She wanted to call out, to stop it, to thank it, but she knew. Some things don't need words. With a deep breath, she turned and ran. Adwoa stood in the darkness, her heart still pounding. She was free, but her stepmother's guards were still out there, the same men who had thrown her into that cage, laughing, expecting her to die. She could have run. She could have disappeared into the wild, but something inside her burned. She wasn't done. She crept through the shadows, her breath steady, her mind sharp. The guards had scattered in the chaos. Some had fled into the trees. Others still stood near the cage, unsure what to do now that their plan had failed. Perfect. Her eyes landed on a fallen spear. One of the guards had dropped it in fear when the tiger roared. His mistake, her chance. She gripped the weapon, her fingers wrapping tightly around the cold wood. The hunted was now the hunter. The first guard never saw her coming. With swift, silent movements, she struck, slamming the spear against the back of his head. He crumpled to the ground, one down. She moved quickly, using the shadows as her ally. She found another guard, still catching his breath near a tree. He turned just in time to see her. His eyes widened. "You—" Before he could shout, Adwoa grabbed a thick branch from the ground and swung it hard. He collapsed. 2 down. She had no pity, no mercy. These men had taken everything from her. They had dragged her into this nightmare, believing she was weak, believing she would break. They were wrong. Adwoa spotted the last guard, the one who had laughed the loudest when they shoved her into the cage. Now he was trembling. He tried to run, but Adwoa was faster. She blocked his path, stepping into the moonlight. For the first time, he looked at her with fear. "Please," he stammered. "Spare me." Adwoa tilted her head. Mercy. Did they show her mercy when they tied her up? Did they show her mercy when they threw her into the cage, expecting her to be torn apart? She took a slow step forward. "Did you show me mercy?" she whispered. Terror flashed in his eyes. He tried to beg, but it was too late. With one swift blow, she knocked him unconscious. 3 down. Game over. Adwoa stood over his motionless body, her chest rising and falling. She had won, but her stepmother, Kemi, was still out there, and now it was time for her. Adwoa walked through the mansion gates, her heart steady, her mind clear. She was not the weak girl they once knew. She had entered the wild as prey. Now, she returned as a predator. The guards at the entrance barely had time to react before she strode past them. They could sense it, the shift in power. No one dared to stop her. Inside, golden chandeliers flickered, casting long shadows over the grand hall. Laughter and music filled the air. A feast was being held for her death. Kemi sat at the center, sipping wine, her lips curled in a satisfied smirk. She had won, or so she thought. Then, the doors slammed open. The room fell silent. Kemi turned, ready to scold whoever had dared to interrupt. But when she saw who stood there, the color drained from her face. Her glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Adwoa stepped forward, her footsteps echoing like a drum of war. She did not speak. She did not need to. In her hand, she held a golden tiger's claw, a symbol of survival, of strength, of revenge. She dropped it onto the table in front of Kemi, the sharp talons spinning before it came to a stop. "You tried to throw me to the beasts," Adwoa whispered, her voice calm, cold. She took another step closer. Kemi shrank back. "But you forgot." She leaned in, eyes burning with the fire of everything she had endured. "I am the beast." Kemi gasped, her whole body trembling. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees. "Adwoa, my child," she stammered. "You don't understand. It was a mistake. I was only trying to kill me." Adwoa's voice cut through her excuses like a blade. The guests, the servants, the guards, they all watched in silence. No one moved to help Kemi. She had ruled this house with cruelty, and now her power was gone. "Please," Kemi whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Have mercy." Adwoa tilted her head. Mercy? Did Kemi show mercy when she threw a helpless girl into a cage of hungry beasts? Did she show mercy when she celebrated, drinking to her death? Adwoa bent down, staring into the eyes of the woman who had stolen her childhood, her family, her peace. "You once told me," she said softly, "that the strong take what they want, and the weak suffer." She straightened, lifting her chin. "I choose not to be weak anymore." Then, she turned her back on Kemi. The room held its breath. Adwoa could have ended it. She could have destroyed Kemi in that moment. But this was worse, because Kemi would now live in fear, every day, every night wondering when the beast would return. The whispers spread like wildfire, in the bustling markets, in the grand halls, even in the quiet corners of Ayoru. Everyone spoke of Adwoa. They called her the girl who walked with tigers. Some said she had tamed the wild, that the beasts had bowed to her, recognizing her as their own. Others whispered that she had become part of it, that she no longer belonged to the world of men, but to the untamed darkness of the jungle. But one thing was certain: no one dared to cross her again. She walked through the streets, her presence alone enough to make even the boldest men step aside. Those who once mocked her, who had watched her suffer under Kemi's rule, now lowered their heads in respect or fear. As for Kemi, she vanished. She was never seen in Ayoru again. Not in the grand mansion she once ruled, not in the streets where she flaunted her power. Gone, like a shadow swallowed by the night. Some said she fled to another land, haunted by the face of the girl she had tried to destroy. Others believed something far darker, that the tiger came back for her, because the wild does not forget, and once a beast chooses you, it never lets you go. If you think Adwoa's story was intense, just wait until you see what's next. Click on the next video to dive into more thrilling tales of survival, revenge, and the unexpected. Don't miss out, because some stories are too powerful to forget.